Welcome to Final Fantasy Weekly. I'm Drew Kreisman.
And I'm Ira Kreisman.
And on this episode, we take one more interlude moment before we get to Final Fantasy Tactics to dive into a little bit of philosophy in Final Fantasy, Ira. Always fun when we can bring up names like Plato and Socrates when we're talking about this stuff. And you gotta start, I think, with the Allegory of the Cave. It's probably one of the most famous anythings in the history of philosophy, pieces of work. It's definitely foundational in Western philosophy. I was a philosophy major in college to get some of this stuff out of the way. I've read The Allegory of the Cave and Plato's Republic many, many times before. We're going to do just kind of a brief overview of what that is and how it relates to Final Fantasy, particularly in the recurring motif of the two worlds, but in a lot of different ways that it shows up throughout Final Fantasy. But it's really important to understand this. Even I was doing some rereading to remind myself. I saw a lot of articles and sort of scholarly essays that start out by suggesting that this is where philosophy begins. And it's where a lot of introductory to philosophy courses in the Western world begin. It's certainly where mine began.
Mine too, yep.
And it's a great place to start. So if you've never done any philosophy classes before in your life, you can consider this episode at least one. You can say you've taken one now. Because this is where most of them, again, in the Western world, start. But there is an entire part of the globe that is far more familiar with the foundational philosophies of Confucius or several people carrying the name of the Buddha. There's a great number of foundational, important philosophy that does not begin with the Plato and Socrates logical, argumentative, deductive reasoning model. It's a great model, and I love it, and there's a lot of ways to use it. It's just not the only one. And so that's really important to say up front.
It's also worth noting that the Western world, and I'm using air quotes here, is kind of a weird sort of Eurocentric way of looking at things. Because, if we're just looking at the Western Hemisphere, that includes South America, and a lot of philosophy that centers on or originates from South America wouldn't necessarily use this model either, right? Are we going to ignore all of Africa? That's the biggest continent on the planet.
Right.
So this is a starting place, but it's not the only starting place.
Yeah. I want to use one of your favorite tricks, and that is allow me the opportunity to rephrase and clarify that, this really is foundational philosophy for Europe and America. That's what we're talking about here. And in that way, it is very important, and it's important to understand it on that level. But 100% correct. Even saying the Western world is a way overreach and an ethnocentric thing to say. All of that said, what is the Allegory of the Cave, and why is it so important and foundational? Well, you can understand, right? Because what it really is a story about what we don't know. And most philosophy deals in how do we get a better understanding of concepts that we don't know about, that we don't understand. And this is one of the first analogies that was written down that we still have today, that we know about, that deals with this idea. The story is very simple, as Plato tells it. Imagine a group of prisoners. Really, they can be people, any people who were just chained in a cave, and all they can see, there's a fire behind them or some sort of light source behind them. You assume fire. We're making it very simple. And all they can see is shadows cast on the wall of whatever is going on, right? That is the only existence that they know. So they believe these shadows to be real. However you define real. That word real is something that's going to come up a lot today, right? Mm-hmm. And so in the story, somehow, doesn't matter how, one prisoner gets free and manages to leave what they come to understand is a cave that they've been in this whole time. Not only are the shadows on the wall not things in and of themselves, they were representations of something, but now there's this whole other world that they never would have known existed, right? And then the end of the story is that the person comes back to the cave and tries to take the other prisoners with them, saying, "This is not the real world. There is so much more to life than just this cave." And in the original telling of the story, because the first person was blinded by the radiance of the sun that they'd never seen, the prisoners don't go with them because they are afraid of that world, of whatever the quote real world, that it might harm them, right? So those are the basic elements of the allegory of the cave.
Yeah, I really like the allegory of the cave. It is a good introductory way of thinking about you don't know what you don't know. You've only got whatever's in front of you, whatever your experience is, and it is the role of teachers, for example, who have hopefully escaped the cave, as it were,
Right.
to go back into the cave and say, here is, so you've got your experience, excellent. Here are some other people's experience. Here are experts' experience. And the allegory of the cave can have several layers, right? So the shadows they think are the only thing that's real, and then they see, oh, here's what was casting the shadows. That must be what's real. But if those are only puppets, then they're only representations of what's actually outside, right? And like you said, the character being blinded by whatever the truth might be, there is potentially some danger in truth, but that doesn't mean it's not worth pursuing. And so the layer upon layer of opening the world bigger and bigger to just more and more knowledge, more and more experience can lead to a sort of, well, I know enough to know I don't know. Is that sort of destroys some of my certainty? And is that worth it?
Right.
Maybe. I mean, I think so.
So that's the question at the center of a lot of these stories. And you'll find more often than not, artists tend to come down on the side of, yes, it is worth it, right? We'll see that kind of over and over again, that a harsh reality is preferable to a comfortable fiction, right? And that is the kind of debate we'll get to have over and over again. Probably the most famous pop culture media story that really uses this analogy and drives it home and has it at the heart of everything it does is The Matrix. Right?
Yeah.
It's almost, in fact, in philosophy courses, overtaken the allegory of the cave just because it's a movie that either everyone has seen or we're all at least mostly pretty familiar with. It's so ubiquitous at this point. And The Matrix is the cave, right? The unplugging from or the getting to the real world is the coming out of the cave. They've even got things like the Cypher character in the first one. Minor spoilers if you haven't seen the first Matrix movie, but he wants to go back, right? He has been blinded.
Right.
The reality is too harsh and too striking for him, and he wants to go back into the cave.
Right. Wants to lose the clarity and be returned to ignorance because in a way it's more comfortable. It's easier.
Right, and it almost always is. That's one of the harsh things about it. Another really popular, well, I wish it was more popular. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, and it also uses this, is The Truman Show.
What a great movie. I
Phenomenal.
used to show that. I got to teach science fiction for a couple semesters, and we watched The Truman Show and talked about reality and whether it's better to stay or to go.
Right, and that really is the question, right? And again, I don't want to spoil the end of the movie, but the artists are making an argument there. But that question of, isn't the world he live in? Truman literally lives in a world that is built entirely around him,
Right.
around his
Yeah.
comfort, around the idea that it's just for you. And so to go out into the real world that is not,
Right.
it is a pretty profound question one has to ask themselves. And I think Final Fantasy gets into some of this stuff in some really fun and interesting ways as well. And like we're saying, it always comes back to that. You don't know what you don't know, and when given the opportunity to learn, isn't it kind of heroic to face the troubling uncertainty rather than to choose that comfort?
Right. To question your own all your own assumptions. What if I've been wrong about whatever this whole time? Do I have to change my understanding of how the universe works. Once I learn about black holes, do I have to, change my political affiliation if I start to disagree with the leaders of that party? Do I have to reevaluate every story I've ever loved if I find out that some of those stories were written by bigots? That can be hard. And I have shied away from almost all of those things at certain points in my life. But in general, I do think it's better to have a better understanding.
Yeah. So let's get into Final Fantasy then. Does this a lot, and again, almost always comes down on the side of, more understanding. It's interesting that the very first game in the franchise saves its what's really going on moment for the very, very end of the game. Because for the most part, it's just a straight up fantasy adventure, right? It's a pretty straight laced, clear adventure right up till the end where there's this 2,000 year time loop. It turns out we didn't know, right? It's the what did you not know? And there's a lot of ambiguity to what people know after the Warriors of Light save the world, or at least break the time loop.
Right. Well, it's interesting because the allegory of the cave is an allegory, right? It's a metaphor. It's not a literal other world. And Final Fantasy, the first Final Fantasy, is also not necessarily a literal other world, though the old saying about the past is another country comes to mind.
Right.
Yeah, I like that it is flirting around this area without going to a literal other place.
Right.
Just the what did you not know? And then it does that other thing. So we learned that there's this 2,000 year time loop. Garland goes back in time and becomes chaos, or perhaps has always been chaos, and sends the Four Fiends forward, and that's how they get to send the magic of the crystals back, and that's the loop, which creates the prophecy, which creates all sorts of other shenanigans. So we did not know that we were, one, trapped in a loop, and two, going to be the ones who break the loop, right? Go out into the sun. And then once we do, we don't even have the opportunity to come back to the cave to tell everybody.
Right.
Right. We don't get to be educators. That's it. And that's, we talked about, do they deserve thanks? Well, maybe, but they can't get it.
Right. It's sort of the equivalent of the prisoners in the cave having their chains broken by a force they do not see, and then just letting them choose or not choose to wander out of the cave.
Sure.
Without knowing who set them free. Really interesting stuff. Like you said, though, not quite as literal as they would become. And these are still metaphors, but they really do take, starting in the second game, I would argue, this idea of there being two literal different worlds and spaces. I do like the idea, though, of, like you said, deep in the past is another world. 2,000 year time loop. Think about our world 2,000 years ago. That's biblical times. It wouldn't feel, it's kind of like Stargate, right? When they first go back, they think they're on an alien planet. It's like, oh no, we're just in Egypt thousands of years ago, because how would you tell the difference in certain ways unless, you start seeing certain artifacts. You go, oh, yeah.
Sure.
But
well, and then for another example of that, if we went back to Shakespeare's time and went to the Globe Theater, it would be even just the language, right? You think Shakespeare's hard to read.
Right. Just, yeah.
And, like if you went to a live performance, that would be also, you might be able to get used to it because it's still English, but it's a different kind of English.
So, yeah, in Final Fantasy II, they use a parallel world structure that most, again, in a certain tradition that is very popular in Europe and America especially, though certainly Christianity just throughout the world, using the earth that we have and hell, an afterlife, which isn't even, it uses the word from the Christian tradition in hell, but it could just as easily be Hades or any kind of afterlife that's particularly brutal in its depiction, right?
Sure. And I think it's interesting that while our heroes in Final Fantasy I go back 2,000 years, our heroes from Final Fantasy II don't actually ever go to the other world. They just sort of deal with the consequences of the other world. And is that another world that brings some sort of a clarity, a knowing what you didn't know, or is it a thing that is just having a negative influence?
Right. So I think there you've got a little bit less of a direct analogy for the allegory of the cave and them more starting to do that. Well, there's two different worlds, and I guess it's a reveal that, hey, the Emperor is summoning demons from hell. That's new, but beyond that, probably not, right?
Yeah, I do think it parallels the allegory of the cave less so. I think it is interesting that they continue with the multiple realms of existence, and start to work on and develop that trope in different ways as we go forward.
Yeah, I really think it works fantastically in Final Fantasy III, as we talked about in those episodes. And it happens right at the beginning, which is always pretty fun and powerful when you do that, where you're kind of exploring this, what feels like a very large continent, and then you realize, oh, it's just this one little spot, and actually most of the existence of this world, this game world, is on these floating continents that our characters didn't even know existed.
Right. So this is the combination of the two things we just talked about. One, we don't know what we don't know. And two, part of what we don't know is a literal different level of this world, right? We're on the floating continents, and the surface world is this maelstrom of chaos,
Right.
except for Arya's temple, right? Uh, yeah, I think that's pretty cool.
And our characters learn a ton. Almost everything they learn from the game, happens when they're on the floating continents, and all of the understanding of. But they do ultimately come back to saving their home, their ground world, the place they're from. So it has that coming back to the cave to set people free moment as well. Final Fantasy IV, a pretty obvious one. And again, spoilers we're going to start to get into here for a lot of these ones, some of them that take place at the end of the game, though I think everyone knows this one at this point. Just the reveal. It's one of the best moments in early Final Fantasy when you take the whale boat to the moon. The entire thing is an allegory of the cave, right? Our little blue planet is the cave. The whale boat is the thing that takes us out of the cave, and we discover this whole other plot on the moon. And a lot of the status quo that we thought was one thing in this moment turns out to be something else. Everything from there being people living on the moon, to Golbez isn't really a bad guy, to he's Cecil's brother, to Cecil's half Lunarian, everything that we know shifts in this moment. And it's so perfectly an allegory for the allegory of the cave.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there are multiple worlds. So there's the planet and there's the moon, but there's also the planet and there's the underground where the dwarves live, and there's the Fey March where the summoned monsters live.
Right.
There are multiple worlds, right? And I love that. And most of them are connected to our hero's planet. But then there's sort of like there's that outsider planet in the moon, the Lunarian's moon. And that's interesting too. And so one of the things about the allegory of the cave is the chains holding our prisoners so that they can only look at shadows is kind of a metaphor for your natural limited experience, especially when you're young, right? But also, I feel like one of the things that Final Fantasy IV introduces is now there's this figure that's trying to keep you in the shadows. There's specifically, Zemus is sort of trying to keep the blue planet trapped in its experience long enough that he can take over.
Right.
And so sometimes the metaphor, the chains metaphor, is not just your limited experience, but what other people are trying to tell you the actual experience is.
Right. Yeah. And that's what makes, and we talked about this at the time, Final Fantasy IV such a great comment on the terrors of imperialism and fascism, and it uses the magical analogy to do so. And some people are like, oh, mind control is such a weak device to let you get out of certain plot problems, which, okay, fine. Again, you know me, whatever, plot this, plot that, it works for me and I'm fine with it. The important theme that comes through is that if you have a society that is subservient to one person, then that one person's manipulations or ability to be manipulated, their limited understanding of the world, their cave, whatever their cave is now a prison for all of us if we live in a fascist or dictatorial society. that's all that matters, right? And that's why having these like entire countries being controlled by somebody on the moon isn't just like, oh, that's a cop out. Like, no, that's a very powerful comment on. It's a magical reason. It's not necessarily something we would see in our real world, but it works as an allegory for why you don't do that.
Yeah, yeah. And so they've got to break out of the caves of their little countries, Baron or Mysidia or Troya or whatever, to come together as a world. And then, oh, and we've got to work with the dwarves, and we've got to work with the Feymarch, and actually we've got to work with the Lunarians also to defeat this one pseudo-fascist alien man.
Right. Because if they don't, back to our original question, hey, wouldn't it be better just to live in comfort? Well, in this particular case, the people of the blue planet of Final Fantasy IV will be wiped out if they don't face the truth, if they don't come out of the cave. Great stuff there. On to Final Fantasy V, where again we have literal kind of mirror worlds.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this one is interesting because long, long ago it was one world. It was split into two worlds to create the void to trap Exdeath, the nature monster of our own making.
Right.
So what does that do to the allegory, right? Now we've got two separate caves, as it were, and coming out of the cave is sort of rejoining the worlds. And not only is it rejoining the worlds so that we have a clearer vision of what the world is, but also a clearer vision of what it means when you trap a bunch of evil spirits in a forest.
Right.
Right? What it means when you have treated the environment so badly. Like, I get that they didn't think they were doing this, right? But they never, the people of the world, however many hundreds of years ago, didn't necessarily take into account what might happen.
Which is an analogy for our kind of energy consumption. I was listening to something, God, I wish I could remember what, it just popped into my mind, and I think it was a celebrity, doesn't matter, was a human being out there, and a thing I was listening to made a great point about how if 100 or 150 years ago, we had realized what mining coal and oil and all this industrialization was doing to the environment, we might not have done it that way. That's one of the reasons things like steampunk fiction exist, right? It's like, oh man, what if we had just known and gone with a different kind of technology? Because, we know now there's no excuse for it. But back then, did people really know what they were doing to poison the environment? And that's the same question at the core of Final Fantasy V. And again, giving that magical element of it allows you a little bit of separation and then to eventually realize, oh, this is about us again, isn't it?
Almost all the stories are, right?
Yeah.
So if 5 is about how we created our own allegorical prison cave with poor treatment of the environment, I think Final Fantasy VI then is the same thing, but with war, right? So
right.
The warring triad, the warring deities sort of destroy the world, they break the world, and then the Espers go off and create their own world to protect themselves. And then we've got to rebuild society with steam and technology and all that, replacing magic. So it's similar to Final Fantasy V in that we sort of created our own prison caves, our own allegorical caves.
Right.
And it's, again, the coming together to face what happened in the past. And as Wheel of Time has recently been telling us, try to do it better this time.
Right. The allegory of the cave is really shown through the character of Terra in Final Fantasy VI. She is the one who goes through the most. You don't know what you don't know, and she has to discover about herself. And, her moment of first turning into an Esper when she doesn't know that's about to happen, again, is a stark, powerful version of being thrust out of the cave. That's not even, your chains are cut and you slowly start walking out of the cave. You put your hands over your eyes. You look around. That's someone just ripped you straight from the wall and threw you in a pool of water or something, right? Like just a complete otherworldly sensation. They don't know, our characters at least, and we, the audience, don't know that the Esper world even exists at that point in time. Or, we just know that they were some people that existed 1,000 years ago and they're all gone now. But they're not.
Right.
They are not gone. And so Yeah, and then even from a meta standpoint, there's an interesting, like, bet you didn't think Kefka was going to destroy the world, did you?
Right. Yeah. To create yet another new world.
Right.
Yeah.
Big paradigm shift. Yeah.
I also think it's especially clever that to start our story, Terra goes into a literal cave
Yeah.
to find that, like you said, the initial paradigm shift of finding that espers still exist.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. I mean, these games are good. That's why we do the podcast, I think.
So we can talk about it. It's
They're
fun.
Final Fantasy VII has a ton of coming out of the cave moments. It's like, every couple of hours there's a paradigm shift, and you're like, oh, this was actually that. Some of them work less well than others. The Cave Sith reveal, obviously the big one being the true nature and history and identity of Cloud Strife. But the two worlds motif is maybe a little more subtle in this one.
So they talk about throughout Final Fantasy VII, or Shinra talks about, I want to go to the Promised Land.
Yeah.
And what is the Promised Land?
Yeah.
And that sort of makes it seem like we're going to this other world. And Aerith is like, it's not really what we're talking about. And so...
more of an allegory.
Right, it's a bit of, it's kind of a metaphor there, President Shinra. I know you just want to strip mine it, but you can't strip mine a metaphor.
He's going to try.
Yeah, he is. So I think you and I have largely come down on the idea that the Promised Land is about going back to the life stream and just having this recurring cycle where life comes and it goes, and we just sort of exist in it. And so I feel like the other world here is the life stream, and you can go to it literally. It's not necessarily good for your body, but it did help Cloud's psyche come back together.
Yeah.
And I think another metaphor there then is Cloud only comes back is only able to come back because of Tifa's help. And so,
right.
If Genova is the one, pseudo-fascist parasitic monster that's trying to only eat things, then our heroes are, in becoming one with the planet, or in becoming interconnected amongst themselves, they can fight against that one, right?
Right. And I think that's really driven home in all the compilation stuff. Like it, love it, hate it. I mostly love it. There's a lot more of what souls in the life stream are kind of doing, right? We see interaction between Zack and Aerith and Cloud a bit in Advent Children, for example. I think we're going to get even more of that in Remake based on the way it ended. That's all I'll say about that for now. But just, yeah, so I just think that the life stream is, however ambiguous or literal, and it's becoming slightly more literal, I think, over the years, it is the other plane of existence in the Final Fantasy VII fiction, right? Final Fantasy VIII takes us back to the moon. Now, there's a lot of different ways. There is, allegory of the cave stuff left and right, and how much of Final Fantasy VIII do we want to spoil right now?
Well, we're doing an interlude. Let's just spoil as much as we can remember.
Okay. So skip ahead a few minutes if you don't want Final Fantasy VIII spoiled for you. The reveal that they were all related to each other as kids in the same orphanage is a big, and a lot of people don't like that moment. We'll debate it when we get there. This isn't really about if it's good or bad. This conversation is just about the allegory of the cave moment. And there's a lot of that because, again, the story about them having to use Guardian forces as a way of them being effective child soldiers.
Right.
And them junctioning and using magic. There is a cost to their power, and the cost has been their memories. And there's actually a lot of really cool anime that deals in this area. One of my favorites is a movie called The Sky Crawlers that is also about child soldiers with no memory of their past. But they don't really get there coming out of the cave moment, and the Final Fantasy VIII characters do, and then so much more of that story is about, okay, what do you do with that? And can you, and then we get into time compression, and there's a similar question to Final Fantasy I of can you break this time loop. Should you break this time loop? Can you? Like, literally,
right.
Can anyone? And then, like in Final Fantasy IV, you literally go to the moon to drive home the analogy that there's the dream world is another two different worlds.
Yeah.
Even though that stuff really happened.
Right. Right. So we talked about in our memory episode when we were deep into Final Fantasy VII, how do you want to be remembered? What do you want your legacy to be? And that can be like the way we remember certain historical figures. You and I just went with the family to the Molly Brown house.
Right.
Her name wasn't Molly.
Right. The Margaret Brown
right?
house, yeah.
Exactly. So, memory is tricky. And we tend to remember historical figures in the way we want to remember them. Does that make it revelatory when you realize that actually Thomas Jefferson owned slaves? Well, it certainly was for me. I had to rethink my, what I think of how our country was founded.
Right.
And how proud of it I am. So memories and dreams, and then dreams that turned out to have been real. And then there's this weird city that's being hidden by some kind of satellite array, and then the moon, and then the time, and the beginning is the end.
Yeah, the reveal of the highly technologically advanced city is another great allegory of the cave moment when you just arrive and it's into what is here.
Yeah.
Or, again, we're spoiling all of Final Fantasy VIII. How about when Sorceress Edea is no longer your enemy and joins your freaking party for a minute?
Exactly, yeah. So again, that's revelations about people who we thought we knew.
Yeah.
Once you know more about a person, are you more inclined to have sympathy for them? Sometimes.
Right.
And is that okay? I think so, yeah. I think it's good to be patient with people you don't know, whose motivations you don't necessarily know. I think that's good.
Yeah. There's so much great stuff in Final Fantasy VIII having to deal with all of this, and we'll obviously have to get to it. But it is one of the games that's most steeped in these sort of deep philosophical questions all the time. And I think it, for some people, it made it hard to follow some of the plot elements, and I get that. But for me, it's just like eating cake all the time.
Sure.
So it's kind of like watching The Good Place, which we've talked about a little bit here and there on this, which also does some great allegory of the cave stuff.
Yeah. Every 4 or 5 episodes, it seems like there's a new revelation of what's really going on.
Right. And so, yeah.
Well, and like, what do you do when you get where you wanted to go? What do you do once you catch the car?
Right.
Right?
Yeah, right, totally. And there's even more of that in Final Fantasy IX. As we've said on some recent episodes, this is one that we both very much need to replay and dive a little bit deeper into. But there is a big reveal again. I guess if we're spoiling stuff, we're spoiling stuff. And this one kind of has to be because it comes near the end of the game, the reveal that there are 2 worlds. Like the fact that the 2 worlds exist, that there is this twin planet that used to exist, I guess, depending on, there's a whole thing there. But Gaia and Terra, even being 2 names that have been regularly used throughout the history of Final Fantasy, 2 words that mean Earth, they're really doing it on purpose now.
Right. This is, again, taking the metaphor and making it literal.
Yeah.
Right. And then we've got the fascist figure in Garland, right? Trying to control. He's the Zemus character,
right?
Trying to control everybody's understanding of how things actually work, and using his puppets or genomes, right, to move the pieces and try to make things better for him. Sometimes, even the fascist character, he's in his own little cave, right? And he wants to, like, in a way, reassemble his cave, like the character from The Matrix.
Right.
He wants to reassemble his comfort at the expense of everyone else.
Exactly. There's also, like with Final Fantasy IV, a big family reveal when you get the second world and the shift into understanding. It also comes with a personal one with the relationship between Zidane and Kuja. And we just talked about with Sorceress Edea. That suddenly is a much, much more complicated situation. where before it was just they're the bad guy and we got to end them and we got to put an end to the whole thing. And again, spoilers for the very end, very end of Final Fantasy IX is Zidane goes back in there to get him.
Yeah.
To get his brother.
Yes, he does. Oh.
Oh, God. It's so good. And then other Allegory of the Cave reveals, obviously, maybe one of the most famous ones in Final Fantasy history. It comes early on. But Vivi, learning about the short lifespan of the Black Mages. And it's just... Final Fantasy has done a lot over the years of asking what happens when we die or what our lives mean, and we've done Lifestream and we've done Spirits Within, Gaia Theory, and all of these other things, but the Vivi character and story arc is one of the best I've seen in anything. It's just so touching and heartwarming and heartbreaking all at the same time. And now we get to Final Fantasy X.
Yeah.
Which is all about this stuff in so many ways. In fact, we've already discussed that when we get to this game, we're spoiling everything that happens at the beginning because there are so many reveals and they're so much more powerful upon a second replay in my mind, or once you've been taken out of the cave, to go back in and see the journey of Tidus. Yeah, I said it. And Yuna and her guardians, and knowing all of what they think is going to happen versus how it's going to go. Oh man, it's like some of my favorite stories are that way, where they're so much better upon second rewatch. I think of Fight Club, I think of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, I think of Ender's Game. But Final Fantasy X is probably right at the top of my list of those. And so whether you're talking about the reveal about who Tidus is, or again back to our literal paralleled worlds, which are maybe a little bit more subtle, but they're there.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I was going to ask you, we just talked about in Final Fantasy IX, the other world is literal. Is the other world in Final Fantasy X literal?
I'm going to say that it is, because you go and visit the far plane and you talk to people. So I'm going to say that the far plane is the literal other world. But that's not the question you were asking. No,
because we start with Tidus.
We start with
in Xanarkand,
the other world,
and he's got his own other world, right? He's got his own other life, and then he goes to this other world. Except he was never did his world ever exist? Right. Well, his experiences existed. Right. His memories still exist. Right. His father, his mother, his life as this star blitzball player. It's all there. And so he wasn't really drawn from the past. He was drawn from a memory of the past, right, or a dream of the past, which is sort of based on these other characters who we don't get introduced to until Final Fantasy X too.
Right.
And so how real is he? Well, real enough that we can sort of whistle him back into existence if we try really hard.
Yeah. So Final Fantasy X is essentially taking on Plato and Descartes at the same time, and then ultimately making the argument, we'll get much deeper into this when we get to that game, but to skip to the very end, that the most important thing is love between people. That's as simply as I can put it. And that the reason that's the most important thing is that it does make Tidus real. Like you said, all of those experiences happened. Yuna had all of those feelings. She didn't invent them out of thin air over nothing. He exists. And the reason why? Because of his impact on the people he loved and those who loved him. And that's why Final Fantasy X is one of my favorite things that's ever been made. Ever. By anybody. It's just a beautiful, beautiful story. We're not going to be able to talk about it for a while because we've got several games before we get there, so I figured I'd drop that now.
That's what these interludes are good for, right?
Yeah. This is your occasional reminder that we have not played Final Fantasy XI very much.
Not
Love the
near
intro.
enough.
We talked about that last time. We gave it some love last episode.
Yeah.
Someone would have to educate us on this, and we're getting, we've got a few more to get to. So let's just jump right into the wonderful world of Iblis.
Yeah. So shall we? We've only talked about numbered games so far, so we get to go outside that a little bit here. So on the one hand, Final Fantasy XII. Drew, what do you think about the allegory of the cave and the two worlds idea with Final Fantasy XII specifically?
Yeah, it's mostly got, again, that kind of afterlife or realm of the deities where the Lucavi live, right? And they don't really start getting involved in the story from the player's standpoint until late in the game. They've always been involved. It's one of those kinds of, again, you didn't know what you didn't know, that these otherworldly beings have kind of always been at the core of this, and there's a lot in that game about putting history back in the hands of humanity. Again, they're sort of being controlled without their knowledge, and even some of the bad guys are arguing in this favor of this, right, of breaking the chains and letting humanity get outside the cave, while most of our heroes are mostly just concerned with like creating peace in their world and returning, the rightful heir of the throne and all that stuff. And they don't really get wrapped up in the metaphysical conversation until the final third of the game.
Right. Our heroes mostly seem to be aiming for stability and survival.
Right.
And that can be, yeah, I mean, so there is something at odds with, like, if you're leaving the cave and you're insisting that others should try to leave the cave too, then you're sort of advocating for breaking down the system, which can be not only scary from a philosophical, personal understanding of the world, but can also be physically dangerous.
Right.
And so where do you find that balance? And I think you're right. I think our heroes at the beginning are trying to sort of rewrap themselves in the cave of stability, in that, we want our kingdom back. And it's sort of, as the story continues to broaden out, right? We sort of start narrow and go broad. We're looking for greater clarity, not only of how do we make things better for everybody, but also how do we, unbind ourselves from the shackles of the Lucavi.
Right.
And that ties directly to Final Fantasy Tactics, right? Initially, we've got this War of the Lions, which is coming directly after I think it's the 100 Years War or whatever, and who's really the heir to the throne, and are the people who are claiming to be the heirs of the throne actually who they say they are? And then there's all the class warfare, right? And so all of that is sort of, remember in Hamlet where they're like so wrapped up in their own nonsense that they don't even realize that Fortinbras is coming to town to take over.
Right.
And so I feel like that's a lot of what Final Fantasy Tactics is. They're so wrapped up in their own wars that they can't even see outside their cave to, well, actually we're all being manipulated by these demons with the Zodiac stones.
Right. Similar to the Lucavi situation in 12, right? It is interesting too because, even Tactics, it has this much more geographically centered story. Like, right, most Final Fantasy games become global conflicts by the end, right? You're saving the world almost always, sometimes more than one. In this case, it really does stay on like one continent. Ivalice is a continent. It's not even the entire planet. But it does still manage to give you that demon world. And there's also, like we talked about, with Final Fantasy I, the deep history of whatever was there before, which is why they've got, guns and stuff, and why you can unearth a robot, Worker 8, in that game, right? There's this sense of some ancient but much more technologically advanced past. The remnants of that world still exist in this one. So, Yeah. And then maybe the
Yeah.
most interesting version of it, not just in the Ivalice franchise, but in all of Final Fantasy, this setup is absolutely fascinating.
So in Tactics Advance, our heroes who are in our sort of modern world, not quite modern world, find, in the town of St. Ivalis, find a book, and then by reading the book or playing with the book, they get sent to a storybook version of Ivalis.
Yeah.
So they don't even really go back in time. They go back to idealize isn't quite the right word, but sort of and it's already magical. Uh, a storybook version, a different kind of version of things that have happened in the past, and then they get to go on adventures.
Yeah.
And so it's a
Yeah.
a literal other world in a way, but it's sort of constructed of memory and magic and maybe a little bit of whimsy. So that's getting back into the faith coming up with Titus
Right.
and his history.
Is it real? It's literally fictional.
Right, but it's real to the kids.
Right. And arguably, like you said at the beginning, Final Fantasy Tactics Advance might be the only Final Fantasy game that starts in the real world, or is supposed to, or at least some allegory of our real world. So is it that? How many allegories deep are we then?
Right. And then, so there is a big trope in anime right now called isekai, which basically means other world or parallel world, where characters from Tokyo, get hit by a truck or are randomly stabbed to death or just die for whatever reason, and then get to be, meet the gods or whatever, and then get to be reborn in another world. And sometimes that world has game, it's called what do they call it? Lit RPG or game lit. So if you were a gamer back in Tokyo, well, here you know how games work, and so you can manipulate the system. And but Portal fantasies go back all the way to like Chronicles of Narnia or Peter Pan or Alice in Wonderland, right?
Right.
So we've got these various traditions of going to another world and portal fantasies and isekai, and I think that Tactics Advance is in that tradition, and I think that's really neat. And I think we might be getting it again when we those guys who really want to kill chaos, right? What is the name of that
Stranger
game
of
going to be?
Paradise.
Stranger of Paradise, right? So is that going to be a sort of isekai portal fantasy story? That'll be interesting.
Yeah, Nino Kuni 2 does that as well. It's a fun genre, another fun version of this type of storytelling. Let's move on now to Final Fantasy 13, which again gives us literal twin worlds. And right there from the very beginning, it's just there's Pulse, there's Cocoon, here's the relationship between them, here's where the haves live, here's where the way have nots and the scary monsters live. And, it's a part of the setup. So, in that way, not an allegory of the cave, that comes with a lot of plot reveals and what's really going on. There's still plenty of that. But the twin worlds, just looking at them, first of all.
Yeah.
Breathtaking stuff. But it is that we do get a little bit of, actually for both, I was going to say, Pulse wasn't exactly what we thought it was, what it was made out to be. There's a lot of that with the twin worlds. But you say the same about Cocoon. Neither one of them are quite what you thought they were or what they were made out to be. And that's an interesting part of it as well. Should I spoil the end of Final Fantasy 13? Are we just again?
I think, this is a spoiler show. I think that's fair.
So the cool, interesting inversion of the tropes coming together comes at the very end of Final Fantasy 13 when one of the worlds is destroyed. And that is the freeing people from the shackles moment where their sort of false faith comes crumbling down and their system of l'Cie and all this. I'm not going to dive too deep into it. One, because it's way complicated, and two, because it's not all super relevant. But their system comes crashing down, right? As does the second world. So where oftentimes second planet or the moon or whatever is an analogy, it symbolizes freedom in this particular case, the destruction of the twin world symbolizes freedom, which is an interesting inversion.
Yeah, and there's a lot of class disparity in this one too. And we sort of skirted around this idea, but to say it a little more plainly, sometimes your cave is your own privilege, right? If
Right.
you are privileged enough to live in a, born to a comfortable, financially comfortable family, that's its own kind of cave. And so not knowing how much better or how much worse other people have is is also a thing that needs to be learned, and it can often be uncomfortable.
Yeah. Okay, the following conversation on Final Fantasy XIV is going to be brutally incomplete. It's that own
Right.
game's damn fault for being so humongous and wonderful and humongous.
And to be clear, I have not finished the main scenario yet.
Yeah.
So
You
you're going to
haven't
be telling me
even
this story.
finished A Realm Reborn. I'm about halfway through Stormblood, and anyone who's played the main storyline quest of Final Fantasy XIV has been listening to this conversation for the first 13 games and gone, yep, that happens in 14. Oh, yep, that happens in 14. Oh, yep, that happens in 14. Ooh, that also happens in 14. Like, it's what it's built on. It all happens. You've got multiple worlds, you've got anything from the different eras, and the fact that the world has been broken and remade several times already, including in the opening cinematic of that game, which was the closing cinematic of the last game. Like, even in meta ways, there's two worlds of Final Fantasy XIV, the one that no one will ever get to go back and see again that was totally broken. The way expansions work is an interesting way to interpret multiple worlds and multiple opportunities at it. There's an astral plane. There's, I don't want to get too spoilery, but like in Final Fantasy V, there are warriors of light. There's warriors of dark. They come from different realms. There's can my realm exist? If your realm exists, becomes it's all of it. It's everything. It all the time. That should actually just be the tagline for Final Fantasy XIV. It is everything, all of the time.
In Final Fantasy 15, we've got some paradigm shifts in Final Fantasy 15, but what do you think about tying it to this particular trope?
Yeah, a little less, other than like with most of these heroes going on the hero's journey and learning about themselves and the world around them. So there's plenty that Noct didn't know that he learns. So, you could go with some of that if you wanted to. But, we don't go to the moon. We don't have twin
Right.
worlds. There's a little bit of getting to the Empire and it not at all being what you thought it was going to be when you got there.
Sure. Well, that might be some of that class disparity, or like we were talking about the individual kingdoms in 4, right? They're sort of escaping their own caves. So you might see Insomnia and its barrier as a cave, and then you get out to the wider sort of region, and that might be its own cave.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, and the Empire is its own cave. That's a way
Sure.
to look at it.
Yeah. Like with 14 or 7 or 10, there's an astral plane, a far plane, a life stream, a place of the dead that we do see, and even again, spoilers at the end, visit and take place in like battles and stuff there. So clearly there's still some kind of agency going on in their astral plane. But I don't know that any of it is really specifically built around the trope of the two worlds or even the allegory of the cave all that much. It might be one where, unless I'm missing something, they were just a little bit more focused on some other things, which,
Sure.
fair enough.
And I do think most of it is just focused on the growth of Noctis and his Warriors of Light. But I do think the thing we don't know is Arden's motivation.
Sure.
And he's more experiencing the allegory of the cave than anybody else is, because doing what he does and why, and some of his resistance and some of his complicity is
Right.
really interesting. And because this one is still only like 3-4 years old, we might hang
Yeah.
on to some of that.
But yeah, I agree that Arden's ultimate motivations are the ultimate what we did not know of the story. All right, let's jump into a little bit more of, I hate calling it side stuff. That sounds so derogatory. Non-numbered, the multiverse.
The
Yeah,
multiverse. Yeah. The Final Fantasy shared multiverse.
So we can't not talk about Kingdom Hearts. I got a double negative on this one. We just can't not.
Yeah. Speaking of other worlds, there's lots
Just
of them.
so many other worlds of it. Like, so the clear and most obvious allegory for the allegory is at the very beginning. It's Destiny Island, getting off of Destiny Island and realizing, oh, there's all of this other stuff out here.
And there's a little cave on Destiny Island with a door to
Yeah,
another
a little
world.
cave. Yep. Uh, where they do all that stuff, and there's coming back to Destiny Island as a motif to free their minds. They don't go back and like get people. There's only the three of them on the island, right? But it's not like they're coming back to save others. But every time that they revisit it, either for real or in their dreams or in a vision or whatever, our characters, usually Sora, but whomever, comes out with a deeper understanding of quote what's really going on, which what's really going on?
Yeah. Well, it's tough to say, and I'm not just being coy. I think it's actually literally difficult to say. I can't. First of all, I don't remember it all. Ansem
Yeah,
and Xehanort and
nailed it.
Organization 13. Um, whew. And then I haven't even played 3 yet, but we played that sort of intro with the
Oh
people with the
yeah,
colorful hoods. And then there's the Keyblade Ward. And are keys like literal keys, or is it like key as in your energy? Yeah, there's lots of revelations, but they're not always revelatory. Sometimes they're just more obfuscation.
yeah, right. Which is interesting, right? But there is, if ever there was a story where you don't go much more than an hour or so without somebody saying,
Uh-huh.
"Here's what's really going on."
Actually,
Yeah,
what you didn't
hmm
know.
lots of that, and I eat up most of it. I will admit it gets pretty convoluted at times, but I have a whole lot of fun with it. And yeah, there's plenty of stuff, whether you're talking about all the different Disney worlds that you literally go and visit, or Kingdom Hearts itself. Like, what is it? And the
Hmm.
door to the light, the door to the dark, the dark realm, all that. Yeah, it's all over Kingdom Hearts. And so our characters are constantly being pulled out of their cave and into a whole new reality that they didn't know or think about or understand before, and they're constantly visiting other worlds. So yeah, it's a constant allegory of the cave. Are those games?
Drew, how much of World of Final Fantasy have you
Oh
played?
gosh, probably a third of it, maybe a half.
Okay.
Yeah,
So we will avoid spoilers on this one because you have not played the whole thing. And this one's also still within the last 3, 4 years. So if you're like me and you don't get to play games near as much as you used to.
right.
But yeah, it has its sort of pseudo Traverse Town. It's not Traverse Town from Kingdom Hearts, but there's this sort of hub world that is not the real version of that world. And then they go out into the real world, and there are constant revelations because our heroes have lost their memories. So sometimes the allegory of the cave is about what you can remember, right? Sometimes that's your narrow experience. Um, and so learning who Luz Varna is, and who are these people we see in visions, and what about the prophecy, and what did we really do? Are we really responsible for some of this, any of this, all of this, and all of that? Oh, and Tama's role in everything, and Anna Crow's role in everything.
Yeah,
Yeah, it is again. It's a lot like Kingdom Hearts in that way, where the whole thing is a revelation about what is really going on, and then what do we do about it? Because last time we tried to do something about it, we may well have screwed this whole thing
right.
up. So, what is our responsibility? And when you talk about in the allegory of the cave, the responsibility of the person who got out is to then go back in. Like that's how I feel about being a teacher in some ways. Not that I'm this all-knowing whatever. Not that I'm the most wise, the most qualified, the most
Well, that was
whatever.
Galif.
But I do think, right, right. Are you comparing me to Golif?
I think I did. I think that's what just happened. Yeah.
That might be a compliment. But there is some amount of responsibility from time to time, not all the time. That would be exhausting. But to helping others gain a better understanding of a shared experience is, I think, important. And so and so taking an active hand in, right? Once you have a better understanding, it's that quote I've been thinking about a lot lately. We do the best we can until we know better, and then we do better.
Yeah.
I do want to touch a bit on Crystal Chronicles. It is a shorter, simpler game, but as we talked about in the memory episode, at least I think we did. Can't quite remember. Uh, Memory of what happened to this world and why it is the way it is, the way it is. With the mist covering everything, and you got to have myrrh, and you got to collect the myrrh. So each individual town, and even the big kingdom, are their own pockets of experience, and it's a relatively narrow experience. And only the people who go out on caravans are. It's not even escaping the cave, but they're leaving the cave, and they're leaving the cave with the blessing of and the hopes of the town that they're leaving, right? And so that's a different take on the allegory of the cave, because people know that there's more outside, but they also know that outside is dangerous. So only those who are prepared to go outside and learn more can, or even should, which is
Right.
an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, and you also reminded me that in both Crystal Chronicles and Final Fantasy IX, the mist and the lifting of the mist is another allegory for the allegory. And finally, let's wrap up talking about the Chrono games. With Chrono Trigger, there really isn't a ton other than the ultimate early reveal that, hey, you can time travel and time travel exists, which, if you know what the word chrono means, you probably feel like
Right.
most people who bought the game knew that was going to be a part of it, right?
Right. And there are some, well, like we talked about, the past is another country, right? And when you go to different times, it's kind of another world.
Yeah, well, certainly the world of 65 million BC is not the same as the world of 600 AD or 2300 AD, right? These are all very, very different places. So, well,
And the Kingdom of Zeal.
yeah, true. That may be the biggest one during the course of the plot, the biggest sort of reveal of what you did not know. Lavos, and even some of the stuff about Magus, that's another big one, the kind of red herring. You think he's going to be the bad guy, or at least one of the big bad guys, and it turns out he's been trying to stop Lavos this whole time. So stuff like that. But I think, yeah, the Kingdom of Zeal, when you get to that and you know right away, you're like, wait, this is 1,200 years ago, 12,000 years ago, and there's this floating, technologically advanced society. What happened to these people? Some media thing. I was watching Mandersnatch on Twitch. Everyone should check her out. She's fantastic, and she's been playing Chrono Trigger. Her first time playing Chrono Trigger. She's a huge Final Fantasy fan, and seeing her reaction stuff.
Cool.
And she just got to Zeal, and she was like, "What?" It has that coming out of the cave moment, even all these years later, for a first-time player. Of I had no idea this was going to happen. And the other thing that she just did. She said, I can't believe in all these years that was never spoiled for me. But again, spoilers, she got to the part where Chrono dies.
Yeah.
And that's a
Speaking
big
of paradigm shifts.
WTF. Yeah, can we do this without Chrono? Would we ever have expected to do this without Chrono? Yeah.
Yeah. And then the rabbit hole goes even deeper, or maybe the cave is longer than we thought trying to get out of it, because then there is an event that will happen in this world that splits the worlds.
Yeah.
So, okay, pronunciation time.
Yeah.
Sergey or Serge?
Surge, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even though Pasho clearly says Thergepu.
Yeah. I don't think you should base it on. But I know.
Fair enough.
I didn't know when we were kids at all how to pronounce this name, but the more I've seen videos and people writing about it, most people go with Surge, so okay.
And fair enough. And that sort of keeps with our sort of natural names, natural phenomenon names for Final Fantasy heroes.
Right.
And so as a child, he is mauled to death by a giant cat, or not, and then that is the catalyst for creating literally two worlds. And what you don't know, you don't know. So if you put a scar on time, Chrono and friends, which we've talked about before, sometimes there are unintended consequences. Superman and Man of Steel.
Right.
Right? So those unintended consequences are part of what you don't know you don't know. And can you ever escape that particular cave?
Right. So one of the reasons why I've always loved Chrono Cross, and it's always been very near and dear to my heart, but I only ever played it twice, and now you can't unless you've got a PS3 and you can go through a whole series of things. And I'm really hoping, rumors about remasters and all this stuff, and I really hope somehow, just so that we can play it again, we get this game. But there is this sort of melancholy that drips over the entire thing, because at the center of it is that question, you experience this other world, literally, again, another world. At the very beginning of the game, you're transported to a parallel universe. It's much like the one that Surge is from, but a lot of things are different. Not everything's better, not everything's worse, like it would be, right? There are some people who've got it worse off. There are some people in this world who have it much better off, who have much better lives. And is that somehow in some weird butterfly effect way related to the fact that you don't exist in that world? So while The Matrix and The Truman Show and most Final Fantasy games, Zidane going into the cave to save Kuja and pull him out, Tifa going to get Cloud, bring him out, they have that argument we talked about. The comfort of ignorance is not better than the harshness of reality. Chrono Cross puts that all them cards right on the table. What if you never existing, or really never existed, being killed as a child, made the world dramatically better for a lot of people? I mean, ask yourself that question. What the hell? What do you mean? But you've experienced that world. You've lived in that world for a lot of the game. You've met friends. Some of these people you care about. And there's so much else going on in Chrono Cross. There's plenty. There's 75 characters, whatever there are in that game. And then we have, of course, literal parallel worlds. But that question is so ambiguously asked and never really. You do literally fight against fate in that game, so they have a moment where they say, no, free will is good, and they still come down on the side of free will is good, choices matter, consequences matter, things are important, but boy, does it not give you any kind of easy answer to some of the moral questions at its center. It just kind of leaves you with them.
Sure. Not unlike Final Fantasy VII, right? There is no, we don't put the worlds back together like in 5.
Right.
And I'm not sure we would want to necessarily. It's kind of like Iron Man's line from Endgame, get back what we lost, but I can't lose what I've gained in the last 5 years. That's part of it too. If I go to a parallel world and it turns out that I died when I was 2 or whatever, and whatever else was better than, I don't get to say no necessarily.
Right. Try to fix that somehow, even if you have some sort of weird magical power to be able to do so. Yeah, fascinating stuff. So I wanted to close with this thought because while we've searched for some of the most literal and sort of magical and ambiguous ways in which the allegory of the cave is used throughout the Final Fantasy multiverse, one of the things that we've talked about, just the way they tell their stories and why they mean so much to us, and a meta conversation, a through line from Final Fantasy to Final Fantasy. Why is 6 in a steampunk world, 7 is in a diesel punk world, and 8 is an anime space opera? Why do that? And why is every game basically an experience of what's around the next proverbial corner? In other words, what am I going to see when I walk out of the next cave? And it's because they cannot get enough of this stuff. And it's at the core of fantasy storytelling and speculative fiction and science fiction. What don't we know? What could we know is the next question. And then we get to start speculating about fuzzy Moogle critters and chocobos and floating cities and continents and twin planets and going to the moon and discovering life there. And as a meta comment on all of Final Fantasy, that's what we come to it for. Show me something I've never seen before. Take me to another world. Us, the player, by stepping into the game world of Final Fantasy, we are expanding our horizons. We are expanding our understanding of the world. You and I, as people who grew up in the United States of America, playing these games made largely by Japanese people, experiencing another culture, expanding our cave that way, right? Or coming out of our cave of just our own culture to experience someone else's ideology that maybe we would not have otherwise been exposed to. A piece of music we might otherwise never have heard, a character design, a story, a metaphor. And so Final Fantasy itself, sitting down and playing a Final Fantasy game, is in a way taking that step out of the cave.